Good morning, Internet. Yashoda here with West Coast Yoga. Today I'm doing a video on my personal life story. The reason for this is twofold. Firstly, my body is getting older. I'm currently almost 40 years old, and if the COVID pandemic has taught us anything, it is that death is always a moment away. At any moment, the Grim Reaper can tap us on the shoulder and drag us far away from our bank balance, our family, our country, placing us into a future condition which is unknown. Also, I've read medical studies out of Israel suggesting that men under 40 are very susceptible to heart conditions such as myocarditis and heart inflammation in general, resulting from the recent vaccines. What to speak of the disease and death coming from the virus itself. So I am keenly aware of my own mortality, more so than before the pandemic. Also, I survived a near drowning in India when I was a young brahmachari, by the grace of God. So I'm basically already living on borrowed time. The second and more urgent reason for this video is that many of my friends and godbrothers resent the fact that I am a vocal critic of the GBC, particularly the original 1977 GBC that Prabhupada appointed. I have lost friends because of my critical tone. However, if my audience better understood my negative experiences, what you could call trauma, in ISKCON, then those experiences would help to inform them of why I'm such an active critic. I feel that the other second-generation types, particularly Jwalamukhi and Saraswati Richardson, are in a similar position. These ladies are very vocal critics of the GBC, but for good reason. And this is the situation for second-generation types in general. We have been thrust into an organization, ISKCON, which defends and protects its senior members, regardless of their behavior. And we juniors are left to pick up the pieces. I don't have any children, but one day, if I did, I would want them to know that I did not support the bogus institution that ISKCON has become. And so this is my chance to set the record straight with the broader ISKCON community and tell my side of the story. Why I am the way I am and what my vision is for the future of Prabhupada's movement. We are very fortunate that in America, free speech is a protected right. Silence means consent. And I refuse to consent to the bogus GBC leadership and agenda, which at its crux is a homosexual and ultimately demonic agenda. Please bear with me because there is a lot of ground to cover. My story begins in St. Louis, Missouri. I was born into a Christian meat-eating family. My mom actually met the devotees and attended a Sunday feast in the late 1960s during ISKCON's heyday. She wasn't pious enough at the time to accept a lifestyle or philosophy and simply shrugged off the experience. As a result, I was raised Christian in the 1980s, along with all the trappings that come with being a juvenile in America, the land of sense gratification. Somehow or other, I became philosophically inclined after middle school and would spend hours at the local library researching self-help topics, yoga, meditation, and Eastern philosophy. This was back in the early days of the internet, and I used to flip through the phone book, searching for local yoga societies. This trend continued for a few years, until at last, around the age of 16 or 17, I finally encountered Srila Prabhupada's 1972 Bhagavad Gita at the local library. Prabhupada's words penetrated my consciousness. I was finally confident about a yoga lifestyle that I could practice at home. However, having never met the devotees, I was admittedly very inexperienced. I received permission from a local religious monastery to access their amazing library and was able to begin studying the Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita as well, which you can imagine was both informative and exciting. Within 6 months, I gave the Bhagavad Gita to my mom. because I thought she may find the subject interesting, and she told me about the local temple in St. Louis. In this way, our devotional practice started together, and we combined our effort to learn more about the Hare Krishnas. After meeting the devotees in St. Louis, I convinced my guidance counselor to let me graduate high school early and began making plans to move into a temple. Luckily, there was a men's ashram not too far away, about a 5-hour drive in Kansas City, Missouri, where about a year or two earlier, Dhanavir Swami had moved from Colorado. He had a vision to start his own center focused on male brahmacharis, which was a trend that he had continued from the 1970s. As my audience may know, Dhanavir started the Bhakti program in 75, along with Vishnu Jan, and Prabhupada approved of their training program. And so Dhanavir basically wanted to have his own center where he was not only the temple president, but the spiritual authority, the guru as well. And so this was the environment I entered as a naive teenager. In Kansas City, I was immersed in the devotional experience, and it was actually quite blissful. However, I was discouraged from asking too many questions about ISKCON history. Dhanavir's program was in full support of Satsvarup, and he would daily read from Satsvarup's Lilamrita, which is a very disparaging book and which minimizes Prabhupada. And so I was basically indoctrinated into Satsvarup's vision and agenda for ISKCON. Eventually I took initiation, but as many devotees have experienced, the temple life lends itself to getting burned out, and eventually I left. This is where my inquiries into ISKCON's history became more fruitful. I eventually found myself in Hawaii, and as a 21-year-old brahmachari, there were many Ritviks in the Hawaii community. In fact, the head pujari was a fully fledged Ritvik. He had joined in 1978 as a Rameshvar disciple, and he had a copy of the Final Order by Krishnakant in the ashram, actually. And so I began reading the Final Order, and the presentation was very consistent with Prabhupada's standard of guruship, that only the pure devotee can be a guru. Why had so many ISKCON gurus fallen down? It's because they lacked the actual credentials. Not only that, but they had so many personal motivations and bad habits. And in Hawaii, we actually have a fallen guru in our community. His name is Narahari. I've done a separate video on Narahari, but I could see his own story, his own experience, this former Swami walking around the community, unwilling to discuss the past. Yeah, these people all have the same posture. Don't ask too many questions. And so I began doing further research. At this point, I had basically rejected my guru, who had, in Kansas City, disallowed me from becoming a householder. Around age 20, I had asked my spiritual master to let me get married, and he frankly rejected my proposal. He preferred me to remain as a drone in Saffron, driving his own agenda, collections, etc. And now I came to realize a lot of these neo-ISKCON gurus were actually against family life, which means they're basically promoting adharma. They're promoting the absence of Prabhupada's Grihastha vision. Prabhupada had a vision that many of his movement's devotees would actually be householders. And by setting a good example, by practicing Yukta Vairagya, we could be practical sannyasis. Not that we have to throw on saffron to be sannyasis. We could be practical sannyasis by living a detached life. And so my orientation became more and more towards this Yukta Vairagya, Grihastha conception. I wore saffron for about 9 years, but eventually I settled into a family role, a Grihastha role. And my mom eventually took initiation. Her name is Janardhan Prita. However, she was also highly inquisitive, and so eventually I was able to give her copies of Bhakti Prabhupada and the Final Order as well. and she was highly receptive.